Chapter 1. I'd lived in my apartment long enough for the city to feel like a second skin, soft in the mornings, loud in the afternoons, and strangely comforting at night. The building itself had its own rhythm. The hum of pipes behind the walls, the elevator that sighed like it was tired of its job, the faint scent of someone's perpetual vanilla candles drifting through the vents. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And in a city this big, finding anything that felt like home was a small miracle. And then there was Elias. He'd lived across the hall from me for as long as I could remember. Not the kind of neighbor who made noise or borrowed sugar or invited you to rooftop barbecues. He was quiet, gentle, predictable in a way that made the chaos of the city feel manageable. I never heard him slam a door or raise his voice. I never heard music or television through his walls. Sometimes I wondered if he even owned a TV, but he was always there. Not in a creepy way, just present, a steady, silent part of my daily life. I'd step out of my apartment in the morning, and he'd be locking his door at the same time. I'd come home late from work, and he'd be walking down the hallway with a bag of groceries, offering me a soft nod and a warm, quiet evening. He held the elevator for me every single time, even if it meant waiting longer than anyone else would have bothered to. And he always kept a careful distance, not socially, physically, a full arm's length always. If I stepped closer, he stepped back. If I reached for something near him, he shifted away with a smoothness that felt practiced. At first, I thought he was just shy. Or maybe he had a thing about personal space. But after years of living across from him, it became something I noticed the way you notice a painting that's slightly crooked. Not wrong exactly, just intentional. Still, I liked seeing him. There was something calming about the way he moved through the world, quiet, observant, almost graceful. Like he was always listening for something I couldn't hear. That evening, I came home with my arms full of groceries and my keys buried somewhere in the bottom of my bag. I was juggling everything badly, trying not to drop the carton of eggs, when my apartment door swung open from the inside. I froze, then I realized it wasn't my door. It was his. Elias stepped out, holding a small stack of mail. His dark hair fell slightly into his eyes, and he brushed it back with a motion so smooth it almost looked choreographed. He wore the same soft, dark sweaters he always did, the kind that made him look like he belonged in a quiet library instead of a city apartment building. "You look like you're about to lose a battle with gravity," he said softly. His voice always surprised me. It wasn't deep or loud. It was warm, steady, like a blanket draped over cold shoulders. I admitted, shifting the bag before it slipped. "My keys are somewhere in here, but I think they're hiding." He stepped forward, but not too close, and reached out not for me, but for the grocery bag. "May I?" I blinked. "You don't have to. I know," he said gently, "but I'd like to help." I let him take the bag, and he held it like it weighed nothing. He didn't brush my hand. He didn't even come close. He handled the exchange with the same careful precision he always did, like he was avoiding something I couldn't see. I finally fished out my keys and unlocked my door. "Thank you," I said, stepping inside. "You're always saving me from something." He smiled, small, soft, almost sad. "Not always." I tilted my head. "Feels like it." He handed me the bag again without touching me. "I'm glad it feels that way." There was something in his eyes, then something warm, something familiar, something that made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't understand. I'd known him for years, but sometimes it felt like he knew me better than people I'd actually let into my life. "Good night," he said, stepping back toward his door. "Good night," I echoed. He paused, just for a heartbeat, like he wanted to say something else. Then he slipped inside his apartment and closed the door with that same quiet finality he always had. I stood there for a moment, groceries in hand, staring at the closed door across the hall. I didn't know why he felt so familiar. I didn't know why he always seemed to appear at the exact moment I needed help. I didn't know why he kept that strange, careful distance. But I knew one thing. Elias wasn't just a neighbor. He was a presence in my life, steady, watchful, and impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I wondered what it would take to finally understand him. Chapter 2. I stayed late at work that night, long after the office lights had dimmed and the city outside had shifted into its colder, quieter version of itself. By the time I stepped out onto the street, the air had that sharp edge that always made me wish I'd worn a thicker coat. The sidewalks glistened faintly from an earlier drizzle, reflecting neon signs and street lamps in soft, broken colors. I wasn't nervous walking home. I'd done it 1,000 times. The city could be loud and unpredictable, but it was familiar. And familiarity had a way of making you feel safe, even when maybe you shouldn't. I turned down the side street that led toward my apartment building, already thinking about leftovers and pajamas, when I heard footsteps behind me. Not unusual, not alarming, just close, too close. I slowed, the footsteps slowed, I sped up, they sped up. A cold ripple slid down my spine. Before I could turn around, a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me back. I gasped, stumbling, my bag slipping off my shoulder. A man stepped in front of me, hood pulled low, breath sharp and fast. "Give me your bag," he snapped. My heart slammed against my ribs. I don't now. I froze. My mind went blank except for the pounding of my pulse. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there stupidly, like fear had glued my feet to the pavement. And then I heard a voice behind me, "Let her go." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even forceful. It was calm, low, steady, a voice that didn't need volume to be obeyed. The man jerked, startled, and looked over my shoulder. His face drained of color. Whatever he saw behind me, whoever he saw, terrified him more than getting caught. He dropped my arm like it burned him. I didn't mean, he stammered, backing away. I'm sorry. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the dark like he was fleeing something far worse than a mugging gone wrong. I stood there shaking, breath coming in uneven bursts. Slowly, I turned around. Elias stood a few feet away. Not close, not touching, just there. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were intense in a way I'd never seen before. Like he was still vibrating with whatever force had made that man run. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. I shook my head, though my voice wouldn't come. My arm throbbed where the man had grabbed me, but it wasn't pain that made my hands tremble. It was the shock of how quickly everything had happened, how quickly it could have gone wrong. Elias took a small step forward, then stopped himself. His jaw tightened, like he was fighting some internal battle I couldn't see. "You're safe now," he said. "I promise." I swallowed hard. How did you know I was here?" He hesitated, just for a moment. But it was enough. I was nearby. He said, it didn't sound like the truth, not entirely, but I was too shaken to push. I bent down to grab my bag, and he moved as if to help, then froze mid-motion, pulling his hand back before it got anywhere near mine. The movement was so sharp, so instinctive, it startled me more than the mugging had. "You don't have to be afraid of me," I whispered, not sure why I said it. His eyes softened. "I'm not afraid of you." But he didn't reach for me, not even to steady me, not even when I swayed a little on my feet. He kept that same careful distance he always did. We walked back to the apartment building together, side by side, but never close enough to brush shoulders. The city noise faded behind us, replaced by the hum of streetlights and the distant rumble of traffic. I kept glancing at him, trying to understand the strange mix of protectiveness and restraint in every step he took. When we reached the front door, he held it open for me, without coming within a foot of touching me. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything." He nodded once. "I'm glad you're safe." There was something in his voice. Relief, yes, but also something heavier. Something like guilt or fear or both. I wanted to ask him again how he'd known I was in trouble. I wanted to ask why his voice had sounded so different, so powerful, so unlike anything human. I wanted to ask why he always kept that impossible distance between us, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I stepped into the elevator and watched him through the narrowing gap of the doors. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. And then the doors closed. I leaned back against the elevator wall, heart still racing, mind spinning. Elias had saved me, without touching me, without even raising his voice, and for the first time I wondered if the distance he kept wasn't about shyness at all. Maybe it was something else, something bigger, something I wasn't supposed to know. Chapter 3. I barely slept after the mugging. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's hand grabbing my arm, felt the cold rush of fear, heard Elias's voice cutting through the dark like a blade wrapped in velvet. I kept replaying it, trying to understand how he'd appeared so quickly, how he'd known, how his voice alone had sent someone running like they'd seen a ghost. By morning, the adrenaline had faded, but the questions hadn't. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee, staring at the wall like it might offer answers. It didn't, so I did the only thing that made sense. I crossed the hall and knocked on Elias's door. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then the lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for him to look out. His eyes were tired, like he hadn't slept either. "Good morning," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I asked. He hesitated, then stepped back just enough to let me in. I crossed the threshold, and he closed the door behind me with that same quiet care he always had. His apartment was as calm and minimal as ever. Soft lighting, clean lines, nothing out of place. It felt like stepping into a sanctuary. He stayed near the wall, keeping that familiar distance. "I wanted to thank you. I began, for last night, for helping me." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad you're all right. That's the thing," I said, folding my arms. "How did you know I wasn't?" He blinked. "What do you mean? You showed up out of nowhere," I said. "You weren't behind me when I turned onto that street. You weren't anywhere near me, and then suddenly you were just there." He looked away, jaw tightening. I was nearby. "No, you weren't," I said gently. "I would have seen you." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I took a small step forward. He immediately took one back. "Elias," I said, "I'm not trying to interrogate you. I need to understand." He exhaled slowly, like he was bracing himself. "It doesn't matter how I knew. What matters is that you're safe. But it does matter," I said, "because it wasn't normal. None of it was normal." His eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment something raw and unguarded flashed there. Fear, guilt, something else I couldn't name. "I'm not asking for your secrets," I said softly. "I just want the truth." He closed his eyes, just for a second, like he was fighting with himself. When he opened them again, he looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. "It's my job," he said quietly. The words slipped out so naturally, so instinctively, that it took a moment for both of us to register them. His eyes widened. I froze. "What?" I whispered. He looked like he wanted to rewind time, like he wanted to reach out and grab the words out of the air before they reached me. "I didn't mean," he started. "What job?" I pressed. "What are you talking about?" He shook his head quickly. I misspoke. "No, you didn't." "I did," he insisted, voice tight. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. His hands curled slightly at his sides, like he was trying to hold onto something slipping through his fingers. "I can't explain," he said finally. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because you're not supposed to know." The words hit me like a cold wind. Not supposed to know what? I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, shoulders tense, breathing shallow, like he was terrified of saying anything else. I took a step toward him, slow and careful. Elias, did something happen last night that you're not telling me?" He flinched, not visibly, but in the subtle way his breath caught. His eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment I saw something there that made my heart ache. "Not danger, not anger, sadness. I'm sorry," he said softly. "I shouldn't have said that, but you did." He swallowed hard. "Please just let it go, for now." I wanted to argue, I wanted to demand answers, but something in his expression stopped me. A quiet desperation, a plea, so I nodded slowly, "Okay, for now." Relief washed over his face, but it didn't erase the tension in his posture. I turned toward the door, feeling more confused than when I'd arrived. When I reached for the handle, I felt him watching me. Not in a possessive way, not in a suspicious way, in a protective way, like he was making sure I got out safely. "Thank you again," I said softly. He nodded, "Always." The word lingered in the air long after I stepped into the hallway. I closed my door behind me and leaned against it, heart pounding. Elias's slip replayed in my mind over and over. It's my job, not a figure of speech, not a joke, not a casual comment, a truth he hadn't meant to reveal. And whatever that truth was, it was bigger than anything I'd imagined. Chapter 4. I spent the rest of the day trying, and failing, to focus on anything other than Elias's slip. It's my job. The words looped in my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. Every time I replayed them, I saw the look on his face afterward, startled, guilty, almost frightened. Like he'd revealed something he wasn't supposed to. By evening, the questions had multiplied instead of fading. I'd tried distracting myself with laundry, cleaning, scrolling through my phone, even reorganizing my kitchen drawers. Nothing worked. My thoughts kept drifting back across the hall. So I did what I always did when I needed grounding. I made tea. Something warm, something steady, something that made the apartment feel softer. The kettle hummed, the steam curled upward, and I found myself staring at the door across from mine. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed 2 mugs and crossed the hall. I knocked lightly. A moment later, the door opened and Elias stood there, framed by the soft glow of his apartment. He looked surprised to see me, but not unhappy, just cautious. "Hi," I said, lifting the mugs. "I made tea. Thought maybe you'd like some company." He hesitated. I could see the conflict in his eyes, wanting to say yes, wanting to say no, wanting something he didn't know how to allow. Finally, he nodded, "All right." I stepped back to let him follow me into my apartment. He paused at the threshold, like he always did, as if crossing into my space required permission from something other than me. Then he stepped inside, careful and quiet. I set the mugs on the coffee table and gestured toward the couch. "Sit, relax. You look like you haven't slept." He gave a soft, almost embarrassed smile. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." He didn't argue, but he didn't sit either. He hovered near the armchair, hands clasped loosely in front of him, posture too straight to be comfortable. "You can sit, you know," I said gently. He lowered himself into the chair, but even then he sat on the edge of it, like he was ready to stand at any moment, like he was afraid of sinking too deeply into anything that belonged to me. I sat on the couch, tucking my legs beneath me. The room felt warm, cozy, intimate, the kind of atmosphere that made you want to lean closer, speak softly, share secrets. "Thank you again," I said, "for last night. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." His jaw tightened. "I'm just glad you're safe." "You always say that," I said, "like it's your responsibility." He looked down at his hands. "Maybe it is." There it was again, that strange, heavy truth he kept trying not to say. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "Elias, you can talk to me. You don't have to keep everything locked inside." He lifted his gaze, and for a moment the vulnerability there made my breath catch. He looked like someone who'd been alone for a very long time. "I wish it were that simple," he said quietly. I didn't know what came over me then. Maybe the warmth of the room, maybe the closeness of him. Maybe the way he looked at me like he wanted to be known but didn't know how. I stood and crossed the small space between us, moving slowly, giving him time to stop me if he wanted to. He did. The moment I got within arm's reach, he stood abruptly, stepping back so fast the chair rocked behind him. He swallowed hard. I can't. I froze. I wasn't going to do anything. I just wanted to be closer. I know, he said, voice strained. That's the problem. I blinked. Why is that a problem? He shook his head, backing up another step. You shouldn't be near me. That's ridiculous. I said softly. You've lived across from me for years. We see each other every day. That's different. How? He didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide not with fear of me, but fear for me, like my nearness was dangerous, like my presence alone was a risk. I took a small step forward, testing him. He stepped back again. Elias, I whispered, I'm not going to break. You don't understand, he said, voice barely above a breath. I can't let you touch me. The words hit me like a cold wind. Why? I asked. He closed his eyes, pained. Because it isn't allowed. By who? Silence. He opened his eyes again, and the look in them made my heart ache. Longing, restraint, something deep and aching that he was trying desperately to hide. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have come in. He moved toward the door, keeping as much distance between us as the small apartment allowed. I didn't follow. I didn't push. I just watched him, feeling something shift inside me. Something heavy and warm and confusing. He paused at the doorway, hand on the frame, not looking back. Good night, he said softly. Good night, I whispered. He slipped out, closing the door with that same quiet care he always had. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty space where he'd stood. The warmth of the tea had faded. The room felt too quiet, too still. Elias didn't just avoid touch. He feared it, feared what it meant, feared what it could do, and for the first time I realized the distance he kept wasn't about shyness or politeness. It was about something much bigger, something he was terrified of letting me see. Chapter 5. The next morning felt strangely hollow, like the air in my apartment had shifted overnight. I kept replaying the way Elias had pulled back from me, the way his voice had cracked when he said he couldn't let me touch him. It wasn't rejection, it wasn't disinterest, it was fear, real fear, and not of me, of what might happen if he let me close. I tried to shake it off, but the tension lingered like a shadow. I moved through my morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, hair pulled into a loose bun, the soft sweater I always reached for when I needed comfort. But even wrapped in familiar warmth, I couldn't stop thinking about him. By the time evening rolled around, I'd convinced myself I needed to talk to him again. Not to push, not to pry, just to make sure he was okay. He'd looked so tense last night, so torn, and after everything he'd done for me, the least I could do was check on him. I made tea again, partly because it gave me something to hold, partly because it felt like a peace offering. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. I poured 2 mugs, took a steadying breath, and crossed the hall. I knocked softly. A moment later, the door opened, and Elias stood there, looking like he hadn't moved from that spot since last night. His eyes softened when he saw me, but there was still that guarded distance in his posture. Hi, I said, lifting the mugs. I thought maybe we could try again. He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. I walked into his apartment, and he closed the door behind us with that same quiet care he always had. The room felt warm, dimly lit, peaceful, like a place meant for secrets. I handed him one of the mugs. And that was when it happened. Our fingers brushed, just barely, a whisper of contact, a soft, accidental graze of skin. But the reaction was anything but soft. Elias jerked back like he'd been struck by lightning. The mug nearly slipped from his hands. His breath caught, sharp and pained, and for a split second, a single, impossible heartbeat, I saw something shimmer beneath his skin. Light, not bright, not blinding but unmistakable. A soft, golden glow, like cracks of sunlight breaking through stone. It flickered along his fingers, up his wrist, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. I froze, he froze. The room went impossibly still. What was that? I whispered. He shook his head, backing away from me, eyes wide with panic. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Elias, I shouldn't be here," he said, voice trembling. "I shouldn't have let this happen." "You didn't let anything happen," I said, stepping forward instinctively. He stepped back even faster. "Please," he said, voice cracking, "don't come closer." I stopped, not because I was afraid, but because he looked like he was about to break apart. His hands shook. His breathing was uneven. He looked like someone who'd been holding a door shut for years and had just felt it splinter. "Elias," I said softly, "I saw something. I know I did." He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. "You weren't supposed to, but I did." He opened his eyes again, and the look in them made my heart ache. Fear, guilt, longing, all tangled together. I can't explain. He whispered, "Not yet. You said that before, I know. And you said it's your job to protect me." He flinched. "I didn't mean to say that, but you did." He pressed a hand to his forehead, like he was trying to hold himself together. "I'm breaking too many rules." "Rules?" I echoed. "What rules?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, shoulders tense, chest rising and falling too quickly. I took a slow breath. "Elias, I'm not scared of you. You should be," he said quietly. The words hit me like a cold wind. "Why?" I whispered. He looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw something ancient in his eyes. Something heavy, something that didn't belong to the world I knew, because if I lose control, he said softly, "I could hurt you without meaning to." My heart twisted. "You would never hurt me. You don't know that. I do," I said, stepping forward again. He backed up until his shoulders hit the wall. "Please," he whispered, "don't touch me." The desperation in his voice stopped me cold. I swallowed hard. "Okay, I won't." He exhaled shakily, relief and sorrow mixing in his expression. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I never wanted you to see that, but I did," I said gently, "and I'm still here." He closed his eyes, like my words hurt more than anything else. "I need to go," he said quietly. "Go where? Away from you, just for tonight." Before I could respond, he slipped past me, moving with a speed and grace that didn't feel human. He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and disappeared into the stairwell without looking back. I stood alone in his apartment, the untouched mug of tea cooling in my hands, my heart pounding with confusion and something deeper, something warm and aching. I'd seen the truth flicker beneath his skin, and whatever Elias was, whatever he was hiding, whatever rules he was terrified of breaking, he wasn't just a neighbor. He was something else entirely, and I wasn't sure whether to be afraid or to follow the light I'd seen. Chapter 6. I didn't see Elias for the rest of the night. Not in the hallway, not through the peephole, not in the soft glow under his door. His absence felt like a missing note in a familiar song, subtle, but impossible to ignore. I kept listening for him, waiting for the quiet click of his lock or the soft tread of his footsteps, but the building stayed strangely silent. By morning, the silence had settled into my chest like a weight. I tried to go about my day as if everything were normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. Not after seeing light flicker beneath his skin. Not after watching him recoil from the smallest touch like it might shatter him. Not after hearing him say he wasn't supposed to let me know anything. I needed answers, not guesses, not half-truths, real answers. By late afternoon, I found myself pacing my apartment, glancing at the door every few minutes. I told myself I'd wait until evening. Give him time, give myself time, but patience had never been my strong suit, especially when my mind was spinning with questions that refused to settle. Finally, I grabbed my keys and stepped into the hallway, and there he was. Elias stood at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall like he'd been waiting for me. His posture was tense, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those warm, dark eyes, softened the moment they met mine. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he pushed off the wall and walked toward me, slow and careful, like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to get. "I was coming to see you," he said quietly. "I was coming to see you," I echoed. We both stopped a few feet apart, his invisible boundary line, the one he never crossed. The air between us felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry about last night," he said. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. You were scared. I said gently, I saw it." He looked away. "I wasn't scared for myself. I know." Silence stretched between us, warm and fragile. Finally, I took a slow breath. "Elias, I need the truth, not pieces of it, not slips you regret, the truth." He closed his eyes like he'd been expecting this. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted, a quiet resignation, a decision made. "Come with me," he said softly. He turned and walked toward the stairwell. I followed, heart pounding. The stairwell was dim and quiet, lit only by a single flickering bulb. He stopped halfway down the first flight, leaning against the railing like he needed the support. "This is far enough," he murmured. I stood a few steps above him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled slightly at his sides. He took a breath. "You're right. I haven't been honest with you." My pulse quickened. "Then be honest now." He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time I saw the full weight of whatever he'd been carrying. It wasn't just fear, it was responsibility, duty, something ancient and heavy. "I'm not like you," he said quietly. I swallowed. "I know." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You don't, not really." He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly, like he was remembering the way they'd glowed. "I'm not human," he said. The words didn't shock me the way they should have. Maybe because I'd already seen the truth flicker beneath his skin. Maybe because some part of me had always known there was something different about him, something otherworldly. "What are you?" I whispered. He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence, like the word itself was sacred. "A guardian," he said, "a spirit assigned to protect you." My breath caught. Assigned by who? He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I've been with you your entire life, watching, protecting, keeping you safe from things you don't know exist." I gripped the railing. "My entire life, yes. Why me?" His expression softened, something warm and aching flickering through his eyes. "Because you were chosen, because you needed someone." I stared at him, heart pounding. "And you've been, what, living across the hall to watch over me?" He nodded. "It's easier to protect someone when you're close. But you never let me touch you." He looked pained. "I'm not supposed to. Physical contact breaks the boundary between our worlds. It weakens the veil. It makes me unstable." "Unstable how?" He exhaled shakily. "You saw it, the light, the flicker. That's what happens when I lose control." I stepped down one stair, closing the distance by inches. "You didn't hurt me." "I could have," he whispered. "If you'd touched me for even a second longer, I might have. But you didn't. That's not the point. Then what is?" He looked up at me, eyes shining with something raw and vulnerable. "The point is that I care about you more than I'm allowed to," he said softly. "And that makes everything dangerous." My heart twisted. Dangerous for who? For both of us. I took another step down. He tensed, but he didn't move away this time. "Elias," I said gently, "I'm not afraid of you." "You should be," he whispered. "I'm not." He closed his eyes, like my words were too much. When he opened them again, they were filled with something deep and aching, longing, fear, devotion, all tangled together. "I never wanted you to know," he said. "I never wanted you to see what I am. But I did." I said, "And I'm still here." He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to protect you from this." "You don't have to protect me from the truth." He looked at me like he wanted to believe that, like he'd been waiting years to hear it, but didn't know how. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." For what? For everything that's coming. A chill ran through me. What's coming? He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that same quiet, heartbreaking sadness, the kind that comes from knowing something you can't say, something you wish you could stop but can't. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Chapter 7. The stairwell conversation stayed with me long after Elias slipped away, leaving me alone with the echo of truths I wasn't sure how to hold. A guardian spirit, assigned to me, my entire life. The words felt too big, too heavy, too unreal, and yet they settled into me with a strange, quiet certainty, like some part of me had always known. But knowing didn't make anything easier. If anything, it made everything sharper. The next few days passed in a haze of hyper-awareness. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before, the way the hallway lights flickered when I walked through them, the way the air sometimes felt colder near the vents, the way shadows stretched just a little too long in the corners of the building, and I noticed Elias, or rather, the absence of him. He didn't knock, he didn't appear in the hallway, he didn't hover near his door like he usually did. His apartment stayed dark, silent, closed off. I told myself he needed space, time, distance, but the longer he stayed away, the more uneasy I felt. By the third night, I couldn't sit still. I paced my living room, the city lights spilling through the windows in soft, fractured patterns. Every creak of the building made me jump. Every whisper of air through the vents made my skin prickle. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting him to appear, half terrified he wouldn't. Finally, I grabbed my sweater and stepped into the hallway. The moment I did, the air shifted. It was subtle, a faint drop in temperature, a soft hum beneath the silence, but enough to make me pause. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I wrapped my arms around myself and walked toward the elevator. Halfway there I felt it, a presence, not a person, not footsteps, not anything I could name, just something. Watching, waiting, pressing against the edges of my awareness like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I froze. "Elias," I whispered. Silence. I took a step backward, heart pounding. The air thickened, heavy and wrong. A shadow near the far end of the hall seemed to stretch just slightly, like it was reaching toward me. My breath hitched, and then, "Don't move." His voice came from behind me, low and urgent. I spun around. Elias stood at the top of the stairwell, chest rising and falling like he'd run up the steps. His eyes were darker than usual, almost glowing in the dim light. "What?" I started. "Stay where you are," he said, stepping toward me. "Please." I swallowed hard. "There's something, I know." He reached me in seconds, positioning himself between me and the shadow at the end of the hall. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, jaw tight, every line of his body tense and alert. I'd never seen him like this, not gentle, not careful, protective, dangerously so. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't look back at me, something that shouldn't be here. The shadow flickered, stretching again. The air grew colder. I felt it then, a pull like invisible fingers brushing against my skin, searching for something. Searching for me. Elias stepped closer, blocking me completely. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Now. I'm not leaving you. You have to. No." He turned his head just enough for me to see the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. "Please," he whispered. "I can't protect you if you're out here." My heart twisted. "You said you've been protecting me my whole life." "I have," he said. "But this is different." The shadow pulsed and the lights flickered again. Elias stiffened, his breath catching like he felt something I couldn't see. "Inside," he repeated, voice low and urgent. I backed toward my door, fumbling with the keys. The air behind me felt colder with every step, like the presence was following. Elias moved with me, keeping himself between me and whatever was creeping down the hall. When I finally got the door open, he didn't follow me inside. He stayed in the doorway, eyes fixed on the darkness behind me. "Lock the door," he said. "Elias, please." The desperation in his voice left no room for argument. I closed the door, locked it, pressed my back against it, heart racing. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard him, not words, not footsteps, a low, resonant hum, like the air itself was vibrating, like something powerful was being held back by sheer force of will. I pressed my ear to the door, breath held. "Elias," I whispered, no answer, just the hum, the flicker of light under the door, the faintest tremor in the floorboards. Then silence. I waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. Finally, I cracked the door open just enough to peek into the hallway. Elias was gone. The shadow was gone, but the air still felt wrong, like something had brushed against the world and left a mark. I stepped back inside and closed the door, my hands shaking. Elias had said something was coming. Now I knew he was right. And whatever it was, it wanted me. Chapter 8. I barely slept after the hallway incident. Every time I drifted toward sleep, I jolted awake again, heart pounding, convinced I heard something moving in the vents or whispering through the walls. The building felt different now, heavier, like it was holding its breath, and I couldn't shake the memory of that shadow stretching toward me, reaching like it knew my name. But what haunted me more was Elias, the way he'd stepped between me and the darkness without hesitation, the way his voice had changed deeper, sharper, edged with something ancient, the way he'd looked at me afterward, like he was terrified of what might happen next. I waited all morning for him to knock. He didn't. By afternoon, the silence felt unbearable. I finally stepped into the hallway, half expecting the air to shift again, half hoping it wouldn't. Everything looked normal, the same beige walls, the same humming lights, the same faint scent of someone's cooking drifting from a few floors down. But something felt wrong, off, like the building was missing a heartbeat. I walked to Elias's door and knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. A knot tightened in my chest. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for movement, breathing, anything. Silence. I tried the handle, locked. Of course it was. Elias was careful about everything, especially boundaries. I stepped back, chewing my lip. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned toward the stairwell. If he wasn't in his apartment, maybe he was outside, or on the roof. Or a faint sound drifted up from below, not footsteps, not voices, a soft, uneven hum, like someone exhaling through clenched teeth, like someone trying not to cry out. My heart lurched. I hurried down the stairs, gripping the railing as I descended. The sound grew clearer, a low, trembling vibration that made the air feel thick. When I reached the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, I saw him. Elias sat on the fire escape, back against the metal railing, head bowed. His form flickered, literally flickered, like a candle flame struggling against a draft. Light pulsed beneath his skin in faint, uneven bursts, illuminating the shadows around him. He looked fragile. Dim, like he was fading. Elias. I breathed, stepping toward him. He lifted his head slowly, and the sight of his face made my chest ache. He looked exhausted, not just tired, but drained, hollowed out. His eyes were duller than I'd ever seen them, the warm glow replaced by something thin and wavering. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I was worried. I said, kneeling a few feet away, "You didn't answer your door." "I couldn't," he murmured. "What's happening to you?" He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the railing. "I'm breaking too many rules." "What rules?" I asked softly. "The ones that keep me stable," he said. "The ones that keep me here." I swallowed hard. "Is this because of the shadow? Because you protected me?" "It's because I've been protecting you too much," he said, voice barely audible. "More than I'm allowed to, more than I should." "That doesn't make sense." "It does," he said, opening his eyes again. "You just don't know the cost." I inched closer. careful not to cross the invisible line he always kept between us. "Then tell me," he shook his head weakly. "I can't, Elias. If I tell you everything," he said, "I'll fade faster." My breath caught. "Fade," he nodded, the motion small and shaky. "Guardians aren't meant to be seen. Not fully. Not like this. The more you know, the more I reveal, the more unstable I become." "That's not fair." I whispered. "It's not supposed to be fair," he said. "It's supposed to keep you safe." I stared at him, heart twisting. "You're hurting. I'll recover," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just need time. You don't look like you have time." He gave a faint, sad smile. I always knew this would happen eventually. What would happen? That I'd care too much, he said softly. That I'd get too close, that I'd break the rules for you. My breath hitched. "Elias." He looked away, light flickering beneath his skin again. "I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Guardians aren't meant to. We're meant to watch, protect, and remain separate." "But you don't feel separate," I whispered. "No," he said, "not anymore." The admission hung between us, warm and devastating. I reached out instinctively, not to touch him, just to bridge the space between us, but he flinched, the flicker beneath his skin intensifying. "Don't," he said, voice strained. "Please. If you touch me right now, I won't be able to hold myself together." I pulled my hand back, heart aching. "Then what can I do?" "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay with me, but don't touch me." I nodded, settling beside him on the metal grate, close enough to feel his presence, but far enough to keep him safe. The city stretched out below us, lights shimmering like distant stars. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. We sat in silence for a long time. His breathing steadied, the flickering slowed, the light beneath his skin dimmed to a soft, steady glow. He didn't look healed, not fully, but he looked less like he was slipping away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." My throat tightened, keeping what up, protecting you, he said. Without breaking, I turned toward him, careful not to move too close. "Then let me help you." "You can't," he said gently. "Not the way you want to." "Then how?" He closed his eyes, leaning his head back again. "I don't know." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to hold him. I wanted to do something, anything, to ease the pain he was carrying alone. But I stayed still, for him, for the fragile boundary he was fighting to maintain. We stayed on the fire escape until the sky began to lighten, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. When he finally stood, he swayed slightly, catching himself on the railing. "Elias," I said softly, rising too. "You're not okay. I will be," he murmured, "as long as you're safe." He stepped back toward the stairwell, his form flickering once more before stabilizing. "Go inside," he said gently. "Get some rest. What about you?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "I'll be nearby." Then he disappeared down the stairs, leaving me alone with the rising sun and the echo of his fading light. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Elias wasn't just weakening. He was unraveling. And I didn't know how to stop it. Chapter 9. I didn't see Elias at all the next day. Not in the hallway, not on the fire escape, not through the thin crack under his door. His absence pressed against me like a weight, heavy and suffocating. I kept listening for him, for the soft click of his lock, for the quiet tread of his footsteps, but the building stayed eerily silent. By evening, the silence had turned into dread. I tried to distract myself with anything I could think of, cleaning, cooking, pacing, staring out the window at the city lights. But nothing eased the knot in my chest. The memory of him flickering on the fire escape haunted me. The dimming glow beneath his skin, the tremble in his voice, the way he'd said he didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something he'd been trying to protect me from, something getting closer. When the sun finally dipped behind the skyline, the apartment felt colder. The shadows stretched longer. The air hummed with a faint, unsettling vibration, the same one I'd felt in the hallway the night the presence reached for me. I wrapped my arms around myself and stepped into the living room. That was when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. My breath caught. The darkness felt thick, almost tangible, like it was pressing against my skin. I reached for my phone, fumbling for the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I felt it, a shift in the air, a coldness that seeped into my bones, a presence, Elias. I whispered, silence, then a whisper, not a voice. Not words, just a sound like something brushing against the walls, sliding through the vents, creeping closer. My heart pounded. I backed toward the door, hands shaking, reaching for the lock. Before I could touch it, the temperature dropped sharply, and the shadows in the corner of the room began to move. Not flicker, not shift, move. They stretched upward, forming a shape that wasn't human, wasn't solid, wasn't anything I could understand. A cold, hungry pull washed over me, like invisible fingers reaching for my chest. I stumbled back, breath catching. No, the shadow lunged. I screamed, and then light. A burst of it, warm and blinding, exploding through the room like a star had ignited in my apartment. The shadow recoiled, shrieking without sound, dissolving into smoke. When my vision cleared, Elias stood between me and the darkness. But he wasn't solid. He flickered violently, his form splitting into shards of light and shadow, barely holding together. His breathing was ragged, his posture unsteady, like he was fighting something far stronger than he was. "Get back," he said, voice strained and distorted. "Stay behind me." I stumbled toward the wall, heart racing. "Elias, you're fading." "I know," he said, wincing as another pulse of darkness slammed into him. "I'm out of time." The shadow surged again, and Elias threw out his hand. Light burst from his palm, but it sputtered, weak and unstable. The shadow pushed through it, reaching for me. Elias staggered, dropping to one knee. "No," he whispered, "not her." The shadow lunged again, and something inside me snapped. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate. I didn't care about rules or boundaries or consequences. I ran to him. "Don't," he choked out, reaching toward me without touching. "You can't," but I was already there. I grabbed his hand. The moment our skin touched, the world shattered. Light exploded around us, flooding the room in a blinding, golden wave. Elias gasped, not in pain, but in shock as the flickering beneath his skin surged outward, stabilizing, strengthening, anchoring. The shadow screamed silently, dissolving into nothing as the light consumed it. I felt warmth rush through me, like stepping into sunlight after years of cold. Elias's hand tightened around mine, the first time he'd ever held me, and the connection between us snapped into place like it had always been meant to exist. The room pulsed with energy, the air vibrating with something ancient and powerful. Elias's form solidified, the flickering fading, the cracks of light smoothing into a steady glow. When the light finally dimmed, he collapsed against me, breathing hard. I held him, actually held him, for the first time. His body was warm, real, solid. He looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief and something deeper, something raw and reverent. "You touched me," he whispered. "I had to." I said, voice shaking, "You were dying." He shook his head weakly. "You don't understand. You weren't supposed to be able to. But I did." He swallowed hard, his hand still wrapped around mine like he was afraid to let go. "You anchored me. What does that mean?" "It means," he exhaled shakily, "it means the bond is real now, stronger than the rules, stronger than the boundary." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Is that bad?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's impossible." We stayed like that for a long moment, his hand in mine, his body leaning against me, the room still humming with the remnants of the light that had saved us both. Finally, he whispered, "You saved me." I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, careful but no longer afraid. "You've been saving me my whole life." He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, and now, He murmured, "I can finally touch you back." Chapter 10. For a long time after the shadow vanished, I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat on the floor with Elias leaning against me, his hand still wrapped around mine, the last traces of golden light fading slowly from his skin. The apartment was quiet again, no flickering lights, no cold air, no whispering presence. Just the soft hum of the city outside and the sound of his breathing, steadying little by little. He felt real, warm, solid. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until he shifted slightly, lifting his head to look at me. His eyes were different now, still familiar, still gentle, but brighter, clearer, like the flickering instability that had haunted him for days had finally settled into something whole. "You're okay," I whispered, brushing a trembling hand through his hair. He leaned into the touch, actually leaned, and closed his eyes. "Because of you." I swallowed hard. I didn't know what else to do. "You did exactly what you were never supposed to," he murmured, opening his eyes again. And it saved me. I searched his face, trying to understand. What happened? Why did touching you fix things? He exhaled slowly, sitting up a little straighter, but not letting go of my hand. Guardians aren't meant to form bonds with the people we protect. We're meant to stay separate, distant, untouchable. If we cross that line, the boundary between our worlds destabilizes. "That's what was happening to you," I said softly. He nodded. "I was unraveling, fading, because I cared too much, because I broke too many rules trying to keep you safe." My chest tightened. "You were dying." "Yes," he said simply. "I was." I squeezed his hand, but why did my touch help? Why didn't it make things worse? He looked at me with something like awe. "Because the bond didn't break me. It anchored me. It made me real." I blinked. "Real, solid," he said. "Present, able to exist fully in your world without flickering between mine and yours. So you're here now, really here." He nodded, a soft smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, warmth bloomed in my chest, spreading through me like sunlight. I lifted my free hand and touched his cheek, gently, testing. He didn't flinch, he didn't pull away. He leaned into my palm, eyes fluttering shut, a quiet breath escaping him like he'd been waiting years for this. "You can touch me now." I whispered. "Yes," he said, voice low and reverent. "I can." He lifted his hand, slowly, carefully, like he was touching something sacred, and brushed his fingers along my jaw. The contact was warm, steady, grounding, not a flicker of instability, not a hint of fear, just him. Just us. I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought I was going to lose you. "You almost did," he said softly. "But you didn't." I leaned into his touch, letting the warmth of his hand settle the last trembling pieces of my fear. "What happens now?" He looked around the apartment, then back at me, his expression softening. "Now, I stay, not as a guardian bound by rules, not as a spirit flickering between worlds, but as someone who chooses to be here with you." My breath caught. "You choose me. I always have," he said. "I just wasn't allowed to admit it." I felt something inside me loosen, then not I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I shifted closer, and this time he didn't retreat. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me gently against him, holding me like he'd been waiting a lifetime for the chance. His embrace was warm and steady, his heartbeat strong against my cheek. I melted into him, letting the moment wash over me, the safety, the closeness, the quiet miracle of finally being able to touch him. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the city humming softly outside the windows. Eventually, he pulled back just enough to look at me, his thumb brushing a tear from my cheek. "You're safe now," he said gently. I smiled. "So are you." He leaned his forehead against mine, closing his eyes. "Because of you." We sat together on the couch, his arm around me, my head resting on his shoulder. The room felt different now, warmer, brighter, like the light he carried inside him had settled into the walls. Into the air, into me. For the first time since all of this began, I felt truly safe, truly seen, truly held. Elias intertwined our fingers, his touch soft and sure. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said quietly. "I've never had one before." I lifted my head to meet his gaze. "We'll figure it out together." He smiled a real smile, warm and full of something that made my heart flutter. "Together," he echoed. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the ground. Inside, Elias held me close, his presence steady and real in a way it had never been before. My neighbor, my guardian, the man who could finally hold me, and I held him back.